Welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast, and your travel number of the week is 15. 15, that stands for 15% of all connecting air traffic in the world, which flows through the Gulf region. Yes, that's right. We're going to talk about what's happening in the Middle East, the conflict there, and how it is impacting travel, not just in the region, but across the entire globe. I'm Seth Borko, head of Skift Research and your co-host of the Skift Travel Podcast. My regular co-host, Sarah Kopit, is in ITB Berlin. Thankfully, she hasn't missed anything that big. No major news that happened while she was at this conference. But fear not, we have a very worthy co-host. Gordon Smith, Airline Weekly's editor, is here to join us. And he is one of my favorite people in Skift to talk to. And he knows everything. No, it's true. I'm not just saying that. He's a wonderful chatting partner. And we are very happy to have him as our guest host in this episode of the Skift Travel Podcast. And we're going to dive into what is happening in Iran, in the Gulf, in the Middle East, and what it means for global travel. So thanks for joining us, Gordon.
Pleasure's mine. Thanks, Seth.
So, let's dive into it. But first, let's acknowledge, this is, I think the word we were using earlier was unprecedented, right?
The word unprecedented has a bit of a nasty habit of creeping up in newsrooms and in column inches and all over social media, especially, I'm a sort of aging millennial, Seth, but it feels like we've had so many unprecedented events in our relatively short lifetimes, or not so short anymore. But this event from a travel perspective, and specifically an airline perspective, is genuinely without precedent. I am mindful that we are looking at this through a travel lens. There is enormous human suffering that is infinitely harder than flight disruption, airline disruption. But after all, this is the Skift Travel Podcast. So at this early junction, I do want to flag that we're not being ignorant to the broader situation. We're just focused on the areas that we can offer, hopefully, a little bit of genuine insight and perspective.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where I wanted to start. But it's really important, which is that we're going to talk about the business travel. We're going to talk about what it means for industry, but we do want to acknowledge the real human costs, the people. Yeah. There are obviously people who are dying as we speak. That's a horrible tragedy in loss of life. And we want to acknowledge our partners. Skift works with and reports on and does research with many wonderful, travel and hospitality tourism partners. And, our hearts and our thoughts are with you in this really difficult moment. So I think it's just so important to say that upfront, that we want to have a discussion around it. We want to talk about what it means, but also we, just like the hospitality industry would want, or the travel industry would want, we want to lead with, compassion and say, like, we are really genuinely thinking of all of the great Skift listeners, partners, and people who are affected by this, all over the world. So,
absolutely,
yeah. But unprecedented times, indeed. So let's start. We've got our airlines editor. Let's start with the airlines. And there is so much more than just angles. Let's start with the airlines angle. So that stat I had in the beginning, 15% of all connecting aviation traffic. So I think one of the important things, I was having this conversation with, I'll call her out, with my mom. And she was like, well, at least it's happening there. It shouldn't impact travel in the US or in Asia, should it? But it actually will probably have a dramatic impact on long-haul international travel in pretty much every part of the world. Is that correct, Gordon?
Absolutely. I don't want to say your mom's wrong, Seth, but...
No, she's wrong. She's wrong. I can say it.
You can say it. I've never been invited to Seth Towers.
Yeah. No. You're okay. Still, the Borko household invite is still open. It was more of an anecdote where I think if you're not super in the weeds of how important of a hub for global aviation in the Middle East is, you might think that this is a regional thing. Like we talked on the podcast about the Venezuela actions and strikes as well. That was truly a regional thing. It mattered across the Caribbean, but it wouldn't. This is going to have knock-on impacts in all around the world, right?
Absolutely. And that's before we even consider the fuel price, which impacts everyone everywhere. And again, without getting into the weeds, airlines are not hedging fuel as much as they used to. So in the olden days, you used to buy up maybe 80% of your fuel at a certain price, lock it in, and you'd have that element of continuity. That is not so fashionable anymore. So that's maybe from my podcast, the Airline Weekly Lounge, which you can also listen to on Skift Podcast. Get my plug in early there. But yeah, it has got a huge impact beyond the Middle East. So I just thought before we came on air, because this situation is moving so quickly, we're recording here on March the 4th, around 4 o'clock my time in Europe, late morning with you in the US, Seth. I just thought we'd run through what is actually happening in terms of this, the big airlines. And there are many, many airlines and many, many passengers and organizations that are affected. But let's just run through the very, very largest. We call them the Middle East Big Three. That's Emirates, Etihad, both in the UAE, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, respectively, and Qatar Airways, which is based out of Doha. And Qatar Airways, for one, they have suspended all operations temporarily. They are not going to give another update until the 6th of March. That's Friday at 9 a.m. Doha time, which means all flights are suspended until then. The situation's a little more fluid in the UAE. All scheduled flights to and from Dubai with Emirates are suspended until 23:59 on the 7th of March, but there is a limited schedule, a sort of repatriation emergency schedule, but we're looking at a very, very small number. The situation at the over in Abu Dhabi is very, very similar with Etihad. Everything suspended until 6 a.m. UAE time on Friday, 6th of March. And there are a very, very small number of repatriation flights, cargo flights, repositioning flights that are taking place in coordination with the relevant UAE authorities. But let's not kid ourselves. This is essentially a shutdown of one of the world's biggest transit corridors. You have a situation where you've got Emirates, which is the world's busiest international airline by passengers and a lot of other metrics, all but shut down. That has huge implications because so many of these passengers are not traveling to the region. They're traveling through the region. So, Seth, if you want to go from New York to India, you very well might fly through the Middle East. If you've got part of your puzzle working but not the other part, it just doesn't add up. As one industry insider spoke anonymously, and one industry insider spoke to me on background earlier in the week, and they said not much works in the system until everything works. So you need all parts of the system working together. So let me give you an example, because I know your listeners love numbers. Last year, Hamad International Airport, that's the big one that you fly through in Doha if you're flying Qatar Airways, that handled 54.3 million passengers, of which just 13.5 million were starting or ending their journey in Qatar. So that means more than 3/4 of travelers are making a connection, and you have thousands, literally thousands of possible route combinations. So it doesn't take much for that system to come under serious pressure. And even in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, you're still looking at around half of passengers in transit. So you need almost all of the network to be back up and running to get all those various combinations working. Otherwise, you're going to just get left with people doing half the journey and not really solving the problem.
Well, and what's worse is this is the hub, right? We talk about hub and spoke. If you lose a spoke, you can recover your network. You can figure out other things to do. When you lose the hub, all of the spokes go down, which is sort of what's happening. And I think it's a great example. I took a trip to Nepal a couple of years ago, and we flew through Qatar and through Doha. I think that's exactly the point that I was thinking of, which is that it's such unprecedented times. This is a cliche, but also like we're all connected is such a cliche. But this really proves it. We're like, I imagine tourism to some of these major markets, India, Nepal, even, Southeast Asian markets, Maldives for sure, all have, whether they realize it or not, dependency on some of these major hubs and major carriers out of the Middle East. Certainly even out of the African continent as well. I think our senior analyst, Robin, I think when he had to fly, even to like London, I think he flies Emirates sometimes. So, these airlines have built them up. I mean, they are world-class connectors, world-class networks, actually quite quintessential parts of the global travel network now shut down.
Yeah, they've made themselves hyper connectors. So you can go from anywhere to everywhere. That's how they're often described in sort of industry circles in shorthand. And let's take Emirates again as an example. The UK market alone, 146 weekly flights, and they are all wide body services. And most of those, not all of them, but a good chunk are on the A380. Some of those A380s can carry 615 passengers each time. And it's not just flying into Heathrow, like many other international carriers. They fly into 3 London airports, Heathrow, Gatwick, and Stansted. And then they've got all the regional departures as well. Birmingham, Manchester, Newcastle, Glasgow, Edinburgh. So they are such an integral part of so many travel itineraries, not just those people who are going on that classic route from London maybe to Australia, which is kind of the cliche example. But when you get to Dubai, you can go to almost anywhere, it feels like, in the world. When you step out of the plane in transit and you look up at the departure board, I still get goosebumps when I just see like just an unbelievable array of destinations. And that speaks volumes to just the hyper connectivity and the fact that you got this sort of structural truth, Seth, about hub and spoke aviation. It works brilliantly until it doesn't.
Yeah. Imagine what would happen to Delta Airlines' network if Atlanta was under if Atlanta was under a shutdown. Effectively, is what's happened here, right?
I would say it's even worse because Delta's got Minneapolis. They've got the New York hubs. They've got the West Coast. They've got Seattle. These airlines are these hubs. There's nowhere for them to go. Every single flight, barring some Fifth Freedom stuff, which I won't get into, every single flight touches the hub. There's no way to navigate themselves away from this. So whereas British Airways or Lufthansa or another airline could divert, and they are diverting around the affected airspace, the Middle East 3 are planted right in it. They are sitting right inside it. And that's before we consider the events over the weekend when you had airport infrastructure in Dubai and Abu Dhabi hit. And it's unclear still whether the Iranians were targeting the civilian airport infrastructure or whether these were missile interceptions and some of the debris came down and hit the airport. But irrespective of how it came about, the fact that you had reported casualties at Abu Dhabi and then you had some infrastructure damage and reported injuries in Dubai, and those shots, we have Deepthi, our Middle East reporter. She's based in Dubai. She had a fantastic video that we put out a couple of days ago, and she was sharing some of the images from inside Dubai Airport in the aftermath of that incident. And it is terrifying because it is just so close to home. Almost everyone I know, it feels like, has passed through Dubai or one of the other hubs. So this feels like something that, and situations in the Middle East can sometimes feel a little abstract coming from a Western perspective. And, it kind of feels crass to say, oh, well, it's Dubai Airport. It suddenly makes it feel real. But it is a touch point for a lot of people.
It's because they're super connectors, right? I mean, I think, it's the difference between connecting traffic and point-to-point traffic, right?
For sure.
The other cities where we've seen, Cairo, Tel Aviv, Beirut, that you are traveling to and from those cities because you are visiting to or from those destinations. For the most part, there's exceptions. Whereas where we started this with, you gave those numbers about Doha. The vast majority, I don't have the exact percentage, but it sounded almost like 80%, almost 4 out of 5 is connecting traffic. And so I think that's a big part of this. So there's multiple angles to how this conflict is affecting travel, all with, first and second order impact. So one, we have had a major shutdown of one of the most important connecting corridors and connecting hubs in the world of global travel industry. Let me ask you a question about that, and we'll move on a little bit. We'll talk about it, of course, but do you think that there's I'm asking you to speculate, which I know is hard, but do you think that there's a long-term implication here? Like when this I guess we don't really know, but when this let's assume this conflict ends assume this conflict ends in the next couple of weeks. We know that it may not, but let's assume things get back to normal eventually. Things normalize, the airports reopen, the flights resume. Do we see a long-term shift in behavior where you said, oh, if you were going to India, you might well be flying on a Middle Eastern or a Gulf carrier? United offers direct service to India. Air India offers direct service to India from where I'm based in JFK. Do we see the rise of more direct routes? Or do you think is there a long-term structural implication here that favors direct over connecting traffic? Or is this just geopolitics rearing its ugly head and we have to ride white knuckle and ride this storm out?
It's a great question. I agree that there's so much we still don't know at this stage. Seth, we're still in extremely, extremely early days. But two factors I would ask our listeners to consider. The first is that travelers bounce back. You referenced Air India there as being maybe an alternative choice. It wasn't too long ago, last summer, when we had the tragedy in Hyderabad, when Air India actually was maybe out of favor among some consumers over perceptions around safety and everything else.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've had strong rebuttals from Campbell Wilson and the team there, and they are, they're back to I would say, certainly just in terms of public perception, they're in pretty good shape again. But there was a period when it looked pretty rough for a couple of weeks. So now here we are, not even a year later, saying, well, actually, Air India might be the preferred option, when the opposite may have been true just a few months earlier. So people, it's not that they forget, but I just think people, the longer it's been between the incident, whatever that incident may be, and their travel plans, I think people are able to contextualize. They're smart and they're able to make informed decisions. What I would say around longer term potential impacts is, even if this thing ends tomorrow, which it clearly won't, if I'm booking a flight for me and my family for our once a year holiday from Europe to Thailand, again, to use a fairly jaded example, and I've got the option to fly nonstop with either Air or with Thai or with British Airways, maybe at a slight premium, or going through the Gulf, even if things are okay for now, are they going to spark up again? Are things going to get nasty? I just don't want that in my travel itinerary. I don't want that stress. There's enough stress when you've got a family holiday and everything else that goes along with it. So maybe for peace of mind, I will pay that premium. And even if things have settled down or are settling down, there may be some consumers who do change their behavior based on the events of the past week. And I think that's going to be very, very interesting to watch. And that will benefit more direct services, if not nonstop services.
So this kind of segues into, so point one, we have lost a major hub in the global aviation network. Point two is actually about, and I'm going to zero in on the Emirates a little bit, but it's about the perception of Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Sharjah and RAK and all the Emirates and Qatar as destinations themselves. This is another angle that we have been, it's less of an aviation angle, but another angle that we have been reporting on from a Skift news angle is Dubai, and we know we focused on Dubai, but it's true of Abu Dhabi and it's true of Doha. These cities had status as safe havens, as safe, family-friendly, easy vacation destinations. And now, Dubai is particular, it became this world-class, in Abu Dhabi too. I was in Abu Dhabi and I really enjoyed it. I'm trying to give equal time, but you get what I'm saying. World-class destinations with holidaymakers, the British term holidaymakers from all over the world, coming to visit. That also might be challenged now. And Deepthi has reported on that, about how this perception of we stand apart from the instability in the rest of this region has kind of been hurt.
It has. It really has. And the larger question is how long that hurt will continue. These destinations that you mentioned, plus many others in the wider region, have positioned themselves as being the perfect sunshine spot. Even in the depths of winter, 6 or 7 hours from Europe, or if you're coming from other parts of the world, not much longer, and you can be in a fantastic hotel with fantastic amenities, great attractions, family friendly, safe, and that is an incredibly compelling proposition for a lot of consumers. And the minute that you implant even a crumb of danger into a family holiday, that really does sort of spoil things for the entire sort of business case of that trip. What I would say again is that, back to my earlier point around people's booking behavior in terms of flights, people are mindful of the situation. As quickly as this situation erupted on Saturday, it could also calm down again relatively quickly, as we have seen with previous escalations, albeit this one is obviously much more significant. So I don't think the Gulf model is broken. I have seen that on social media, people saying this is, Dubai, it's reached its peak, Abu Dhabi's reached its peak, Qatar's reached its peak, the Middle East as a holiday destination has reached its peak. I do not agree with that at all. No. The Gulf model is alive and well, and actually what we have seen from a destination level, from a state level in these countries, is a very, very strong showing. Again, it's not entirely in my wheelhouse, but the fact that you've had the extensions of the hotels for stranded passengers.
And the UAE has I believe, issued a statement that they'll basically cover costs of stranded passengers, basically to say, we got your back, which is an incredible move.
Exactly. And, there is a feeling that, yes, this is unfortunate. This is not what anyone in the region wanted. And this is, in many ways, depending on your perspective, not their war. They're sort of caught in the crossfire, literally, literally and figuratively. But there is a feeling, I think speaking to some of my wider network that are in the region on holiday or transiting or who are based in the region, that actually the governments of the countries that we've just spoken about, they have actually performed pretty well in what is a very, very difficult situation. And they have been able to reassure a lot of holidaymakers and vacationers that they've got their back. So I think people will remember that.
What I would share from a research perspective on this topic, specifically the destination and the perception topic, is that it's interesting. And I don't want to bring, I don't know, if like stereotypes or stuff into it, but some destinations see regular instability and it doesn't matter and they shrug it off. In our neck of the world, Mexico, which we talked about in the last episode of the podcast, I do not expect Cancun will see any long-term damage from some of this cartel stuff. Like, there's this certain give or take of people sort of expected and their sort of destination resilience. I think, for instance, I guess I'm going to name some names. I hope that's okay. But like, I think about Thailand, which has actually had a military coup where people were stuck at the airport, or a military coup. I'm not qualified to speak to the geopolitics of it, but there was protests, counter protests, military action that has happened. And the destination quarter sort of shrugged it off and made internet. I mean, you know the story I'm talking about, right? Where a couple of years ago.
Yeah. I was in Bangkok at the time. It was an interesting perspective. There was civil unrest, and the main motorway between Bangkok City and the airport was blocked, and there was a situation there that was not nice, frankly, for a situation that many tourists didn't expect to happen. It's usually a fun, carefree place. But yeah, to your broader point, there are destinations that you sort of bake in a little bit of intrepidness, shall we say? You bake in a little bit of energy and a little bit of maybe the unknown. And there's others that really do position themselves as steady Eddie, safer than safe. And I think the consumer is mindful of that.
Well, there are some places where you bake in a little bit of breakage, which is maybe where Mexico falls into that. In Thailand, I don't think people do bake in that sort of stuff. They think it's this like paradise, and the reality is, it happens, it makes the news, and people move on. I sometimes like to tell the example. Like, I mean, Fiji has had military coups. Fiji, people don't bake in a little bit of adventurousness when they're going to Fiji. They're going for paradise, and it will be for them. But every once in a while, there has been, I just Googled, there's been, 4 major military coups since 1987, the most recent in 2006. So it's been a while. But even when that happens, it can come back pretty fast. And this is the research piece of it too, is that we've actually looked at some academic research. This wasn't Skift research, but this is our interpretation of academic research. And this comes back to flying. And it was research that was done after and because of 9/11. And really the main thing that drives people's decision to decide that a trip is too risky is, well, it comes back to family. So my mom. If you're going to book a trip and your mom is going to call you up and be like, really? Versus if your friends are going to be like, really?
Yeah.
When your social circle is nervous, that is what drives people to avoid destinations. So that's why I think Thailand and Fiji bounce back so quickly. Because when you say I'm going to Thailand, no one bats an eye. When you say I'm going to Fiji, no one bats an eye. When you say I'm going to Mexico, people might bat an eye, but enough people that they know will have been to Mexico to know that it's fine. And so I think that's going to be the key for recovery in some of these regions, is how quickly can they get that? Yeah, I was just in Dubai last week, and you know what? It's fully recovered. It's back to normal. The sooner that they can get that conversation happening, the sooner they can recover. And of course, I mean, that never happens for a place like Baghdad, because no one knows anyone other than service members who have been to Baghdad. So it can never stage that. It's much harder to stage that recovery for a new or unknown destination, or for a destination where there have been real issues. But I would like to think that for, the Dohas, the Dubais, the Qatars, and I think also here is where their business ties will matter too, because maybe it's too risky for me to risk my one family vacation a year. But all of a sudden, people start doing business. There's the expat community. I was just there. That conversation is the key conversation that needs to start happening after this conference is over, I think, to get people back into these markets.
Completely agree, Seth. And I think the business community will have an important part to play. And it is important to stress as well. Yeah, I've got people in my network who are based in the region, and they say it's at the same time as maybe rockets flying overhead and interceptions and everything, there is still a degree of normality. So let's not draw immediate parallels with what we're seeing on the 24-hour news, and particularly on social media, never mind on verified videos and so on. There is still a lot of just ordinary people going about their daily lives, albeit being mindful of the broader situation and paying attention to what the authorities are advising. But this is not a case where everyone is in the bunker and sort of holding out. There is still the people are still enjoying some of the best of this region, but the situation is difficult from an airline point of view. If we can just bring it back for one moment in terms of recovery, because I think that's a really important one. These Gulf airlines are not designed to fly empty. Even Etihad, I was looking at some of their numbers just in the past hour, and for January, their load factor was the mid-80s%. What does a load factor mean? That's how many bums on seats you have on the airplane. So 85% means, on average, 85% of your plane is full. That obviously means a very, very thin margin of empty seats. So when you've got, like we said earlier, 615 people booked potentially on an A380, one single plane going from Dubai to wherever it may be, to reaccommodate that number of people when you've only got 15% here, 15% here, it just does not work. Because every day that this crisis continues, it's hundreds of thousands of other people that had travel plans for today that are not flying. Not all of those will want to fly. Not all of those will be flying through the region. Others will be accommodated on other carriers. Some might just say, you know what, that trip is just not worth it anymore. So we're not talking about that net number carrying over directly. But let's say even 50% of that number still need to get from A to B. It is an enormous figure. And it's going to become a really sort of fascinating in a way from an industry perspective to see how these airlines, and they are better placed than most, like I said at the start, to do this, how they manage that logistical exercise of flying all of these people back to where they need to be. Never mind cargo, never mind bags, and all the other elements. It's going to be an enormous task. But if anyone can do it, it's these guys.
It's these guys. Let me ask you another point. So we have the implications of the global network, the implications for the carriers themselves, with now they're going to need to reaccommodate and also need to fly on thin margins. We've got the implications for the tours, for the Middle East as a destination. You brought up another important one that's critical for every airline in the world, every company in the world: oil.
Oh, yes.
How much are airlines at risk from an oil? So far, oil has gone up, but it has not spiked to the degree that we thought that it might have. If you're an airline CEO, and let's take ourselves out of the Middle East. If you're an airline CEO in Europe or an airline CEO in the US, how worried are you about oil right now?
I'd be worried. Yeah. Because you've got a few factors at play. You've got maybe not US, but if you rely on just physically getting the oil out of the Middle East, we've got situations around potential blockade of getting the product literally out of the Gulf and into where it needs to be. That's a very, very real factor. But then even if you're not talking about Middle Eastern oil, you will still be affected by the global oil price, the WTI price. And that has been steadily tracking up. It was around mid-50s in December. That's $55 a barrel. Now, last time I checked, it was around 74. Not all of that increase has been over the past week. It had been tracking up as the rhetoric in Washington and elsewhere had been, so the mood music had been changing around Iran, and we were expecting something to happen. But be in no doubt, fuel is the single largest cost for most airlines, if not every airline. And when that increases, that has an immediate or near immediate impact on the bottom line. So, like I said, the hedging is fallen out of fashion. So we're not talking about oil price spikes on the Monday. I'm going to be paying a higher price on the Tuesday. It bleeds through the system. But we are talking about potentially, if you do have these inflated prices, and I've seen some analysts, especially earlier in the week, talking about $100 oil, that would be really, really nasty. If I was an airline executive sitting in Atlanta or Chicago or London or Madrid, yes, oil prices would worry me, as would the potential sort of contagion effect of what's happening here in the Middle East.
Gordon, did you know that I used to be a derivatives trader?
You did not.
Yeah. So when you were talking about hedging, I used to, that was a different life, different world. But yeah, listeners, I'll let you in on a secret as well. I used to do that.
So Skift is your second most exciting job.
Second most exciting. Yeah, this is my, yeah. Well, I will tell you, as a former trader, the worst time to hedge is now. The time to put your hedges on has passed. And
but what if the price goes up even more?
Well, yeah.
Lock it in at 74, and then we'll be laughing when it goes to 100.
If it goes to 100, absolutely. The thing is that you're also, well, we don't need to get too into it, but like you're also paying, you're going to be paying you're buying, your premiums are going to be very expensive. So you're paying not just the price today, but you're also paying a premium for the volatility and the fear and the uncertainty in the market.
For sure.
So there is now a huge, I am sure, fear premium baked into the price of hedges that goes, you're paying for the actual hedge and you're paying for the fear in the marketplace.
That's
and
a great
you will
point.
be eating both of those costs right now as an airline.
My final point on airline economics, I promise, is we just had the sort of big run of fourth quarter numbers and some of the full year numbers out of a lot of the big airlines. And they've seen labor costs go up, maintenance costs go up. One area that has gone down, broadly speaking, is fuel over the past 12 months. And actually, the reduced fuel price has been able to offset some of the increases elsewhere in their business. So if we do now have a situation, Seth, where you've got elevated fuel prices and those costs are still rising in the rest of the business, you're not going to be able to have that offset anymore. And that could ultimately affect the margins.
And sorry, I can't help myself. Well, one more thing.
Go on.
That Jay, your colleague Jay, always says to me is that, a lot of costs on a long haul flight don't scale linearly. So airline economics here, if you need to put catering on a plane, it costs the same to cater a 3-hour flight a little bit, mostly the same to cater a 3-hour flight as a 8-hour flight. And if you need multiple meals, it gets more expensive. Generally, you get a couple more flight attendants for a longer haul flight, fine. But it's kind of the maintenance on the aircraft is generally like, yes, these things go up. But the longer you fly, the more fuel you burn. There's no way around it. There is no way to amortize that cost. You fly more hours, you burn more fuel. It is a direct one-to-one linear relationship. There's very few economies. Whatever, cruise versus jet stream, there's ways, but very hard to minimize that. So if oil prices go up, we would also expect the fares to be most affected to be the long-haul fares. Generally, all else equal, economists speak, you never know for sure. So we talk about affordability in travel, and we talk about how these long haul connecting flights all tend to go through the Gulf. We could be in a world with less connectivity and more cost and more price for long haul travel. Again, extrapolating from this is a regional thing to actually this has some implications for the structural ways that we travel, across regions. I don't know.
You're absolutely right. It has a very real impact on passenger behavior. I have a friend who's in Bangkok right now. They were due to fly back to the UK earlier this week. You know what they've done? They've taken the long way home. They've flown via Los Angeles.
America?
Yeah.
Wow.
They needed to get home, and they said, everything else was completely booked out. And non-stop options were just literally, it was like that scene in Home Alone. They just couldn't get any tickets. They were sort of at their airline desk. I need to get home. And they found a cheap option to get through the US and then back over that way, which is absolutely wild. But it was obviously speaking to the fairly unique situation that he was in at that time. But an extreme example, yes. But I think, back to our earlier point, there will be fundamental changes to passenger consumer behavior and airline behavior the longer that this drags on.
Is there anything, I don't know if you know this, is there anything to airspace closures that matters too? Because first we lost Russian airspace. Now if we close the Middle East airspace, that Europe to Asia kind of transcontinental traffic I mean, where do you go? Do you go over the pole? Like, is there an airspace angle to this story as well?
Huge, absolutely huge. It's the uncertainty, Seth. So even if you've got crews ready, planes ready, passengers ready, demand, tick, 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 tick. If you don't have the airspace, not much else happens. And it's very, very easy to draw parallels with the pandemic. The pandemic was terrible in many ways, but it didn't affect airspace. So even during the darkest days of COVID-19, some flights were still operating. So Qatar Airways, you don't have anything from them until at least the weekend. In contrast, Qatar Airways, their network never fell below 33 international destinations during the pandemic. And it was a lifeline for many, many people still trying to get from A to B. They are now frozen out because of the airspace. So you make a great point. Russian airspace is closed. Belarusian airspace is off limits to many. Ukraine, and then you've got other areas that were already persona non grata for, Indian Airlines aren't flying over Pakistan, for example. When you've got a situation where the corridors are under extreme strain, and Iran, I was looking at who was flying over Iran on Friday night before this all kicked off. There was still some very, very big names relying on Iranian airspace, not to mention Iraqi, Israeli, Jordanian, Syrian, and elsewhere. I was speaking to the IATA Director General, Willie Walsh, last May, and even back then, he described, and he's a former pilot, he knows his way around airspace and corridors and everything else. Even in May, he said it was the worst he had ever seen it. And
now it's worse.
Things are infinitely worse now. So there will be a lot of people who are worried that, yes, even if these airlines get back in the sky, if we've got a situation of extended uncertainty, particularly over Iran, but maybe over Iraq and other neighboring countries, very, very important aviation corridors that persists, that could be very, very damaging. Because obviously you've got longer reroutings. So Virgin Atlantic earlier in the week was saying, we're not flying to Dubai, but even our flights to India and to the Maldives and to other parts of the world, they're going to be longer. And most airlines only have their aircraft on the ground for an hour or two before they turn it around, clean it, refuel it, get the catering, and then head back to base. They don't have a huge buffer in their schedules. So there's a huge knock-on impact on everything around scheduling, but it remains to be seen how long these airspace closures extend. But beyond a no doubt, even if we get aircraft back in the sky and Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha back operating, if you've got no Iraqi airspace, for example, or no Iranian airspace, for example, that will have seriously profound issues for the entire industry.
Azerbaijan, for the geographer nerds, is about to get a major windfall from overflight payments.
Oh, the overfly money, yeah.
Because right now, I mean, I just looked it up. I'm looking at flight map from Heathrow to Tokyo, which is quintessential, Europe to Asia business travel route. The shortest route would be over Russia. Can't do that. Then you would go through Iran. Can't do that. There is go south. That's way out of the way. You can't go through, some parts of Middle East, Saudi, and the Gulf right now. That's at least temporary. There's literally one corridor through the Caucasus right now, unless you go way around or go way south or go the other way around. It's a kind of scary thought. We don't think about airspace as infrastructure, but it is.
It's so, you're so right. We think of infrastructure as being the metal in the planes, the airports, everything physical, even air traffic control we sort of kind of consider, but just the airspace, that kind of seems like sort of godly, earthly thing.
Yeah.
There aren't really humans involved in that until there are, of course. And until you point about London and Tokyo, I was looking at All Nippon. They obviously fly from Heathrow to Tokyo and back and forth. It's interesting. Some days they fly that route over the Caucasus, like you mentioned. Others, they go right over the pole. So,
wow. It's probably winds and all that stuff. Like physics, there's real physics involved in travel. It's not just that's crazy.
Yeah. It's fascinating to watch. But there are just so many factors at play right now. So I do feel for our sort of broader colleagues in the wider industry, the route planners and the network planners and the revenue managers. There are just so many moving parts here. So trying to keep an airline, never mind an international airline, ticking over in normal times is hard enough. But when there are so many variables, extreme number of variables, plus passenger safety and cost considerations, it is just I just don't even know where they begin. It's an incredibly complex task.
And you are very right to feel for the route planners, but I know airlines and aviation is your beat, but I would expand it more broadly to, if you run Tokyo or Japan as a destination, or if you have a tour operator in Japan, these connectivity is more fragile than you realize. If you run a resort in the Maldives right now, you are going to have knock-on implications, even though you are I actually don't know the distances, but hundreds of thousands of miles away from where things are kicking off. And I think this is sort of my closing thought and my takeaway from all of this is that I sit in the research seat. We like to do a lot of travel economics. We like to think about this stuff. And the number one question we get is travel recession proof? What does an economic slowdown mean? What does the economy mean for this? If the economy slows here, if it speeds up there, what's it going to mean for our industry and for my business? And I wonder now if we've been asking the wrong questions, because despite all of the economic uncertainty and all the economic turmoil we've had in the last few years, travel just continues to grow up, up, up. Maybe the right question should not have been, is travel recession proof? Maybe the right question should have been, is travel politics proof? And what this is clearly showing is it's not. That there's core infrastructure, whether it is networks, airlines, airspace, connectivity, brand reputation, word of mouth, that is fundamental infrastructure that we take for granted. I won't say it's fragile. I think it can come back, but I will say we take it for granted. And I think from the research perspective, that's my key takeaway from this news story.
Beautifully put, Seth. Completely agree. And I would just emphasize the Gulf model is not broken. It's damaged. It's hurting, but it will bounce back.
Gulf will bounce back. I'm rooting for them. I mean, having been there and worked with the folks there, they are world class. And the Gulf and the Middle East has just been such a bright spot for tourism. They understand hospitality. They understand the need to invest. They understand building these great brands. And so we certainly believe they will bounce back, and we are certainly rooting for them. Well, I think that's time, Gordon. Time always ticks by when we're chatting. I love chatting with you. Like I said, one of my favorite chats at Skift. I hope our listeners have enjoyed it as well. Thanks so much for joining, Gordon.
Pleasure, Seth. And I would say just highlight Deeply, our reporter. She's in Dubai. She's putting out some fantastic reporting at the minute. So keep an eye on skift.com over the coming days, because this is a fluid situation. But we've got some great news reporting, both from Payden, from myself, and from the broader team. So a little shameless plug for what we're doing there. And then Airline Weekly as well, if you're looking for a little bit of a deeper dive into how this is affecting the airline industry in particular.
Couldn't agree. Go check it out. Go read it. And I would even go one step further. What do you think? Let us know. Write into the podcast. We'll address on the next episode. If you have any extra insights or questions or comments, we would love to hear from you and what you make of this current situation. For all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week.